A holy grail lens that almost every videographer or photographer wants to have in their bag is a 70 to 200 millimeter. This 70 to 200 millimeter in particular is a very popular one, the Sony 70 to 200 millimeter f2.8 Mark II, but it costs a whopping $3,500. On the other hand, this 70 to 200 millimeter lens costs only $1,500. So today we're going to talk about the differences and if you actually need to spend $2,000 extra to get this very popular lens, or if this much cheaper alternative is going to work just fine for you. What's going on? My name is Peter Sarellas. I'm a videographer and editor from Toronto, Canada. I specialize in sports videography, and I've been excited to get my hands on this lens for a while, and I haven't actually used it yet, which kind of led me to thinking, will it actually improve the quality of my videos, or should I stick with this 70 to 100 millimeter f4 that I've been using for years? So we're going to compare the two today, talk about the pros and cons. We're going to take them to film a basketball game, since one of the things that you do most often with a 70 to 100 millimeter lens is film sports and action. Is one of the things that they are best at. But first, while we're here, we're going to talk about some of the differences between these two lenses. So let's start with the one that you're probably here for, the 70 to 100 f2.8 Mark II. So this lens was released in 2021. It currently costs $3,500. That's Canadian. And I don't know what the exact measurement is like on Sony's website or anything, but I weighed it on my kitchen scale here and it weighed 2 pounds and 8.1 ounces. It does zoom internally, which is very nice, so you don't have any of that protruding, and it has an absolute wealth of custom function buttons. It is a little bit bigger than the one we're going to talk about next. I'll put them next to each other right now so you can see that, but the size difference, although it's a little bit fatter and a little bit taller, isn't crazy. So this 70 to 200 millimeter f2.8 lens has a focus ring, a zoom ring, which zooms internally, and an aperture ring, which you can bring from obviously f2.8 to automatic, which will make it so that you can adjust your aperture on the camera, but it goes up to f22. And this aperture ring also is clickable or declickable. So you can see here when I turn clicking off, then I can move the aperture ring without any click for smooth pulls of my aperture. And I can also set it to automatic right there, and then turn on my iris lock, and this will lock the aperture ring in place so that it can't move, and I can just control everything on my camera. This lens also has an autofocus and manual focus toggle if you want to toggle that on the lens. It has full-time DMF, which means if you want, you can use your manual focus ring to override your autofocus and pull focus manually. And then when you stop your manual focus, your autofocus can resume. It also has the option to limit your focus, so you focus on nothing that is closer than 3 meters away. I talked about this in a previous video, but this is good for when you're filming a sport like baseball where there's a mesh in the way and your subject is further away and you don't want your autofocus to pick up on that mesh, that netting, or the cage, or whatever it is that's between you and your subject. Then it also has optical steady shot, which you can turn on or off in the lens, which is very helpful and should give you a nice stable image when paired with your in-body stabilization as well, if your camera has that type of thing. And it has 3 custom modes that you can pick from for your stabilization. All in all, it seems like a really impressive lens on paper, but again, that's $3,500. So let's talk about what you get in this smaller, lighter lens that's significantly older in the 70 to 100 millimeter f4. Now, unlike the newest f2.8 version that came out in 2021, this lens was released in 2014. It currently costs $1,500 Canadian new, but you can get it for even cheaper than that if you go used. When I weighed it on my scale, it was 2 pounds and 1.8 ounces. Overall, it just has a smaller build than the f2.8 model, as you can see right here. And it does have an internal zoom, just like the f2.8. And it does also have some custom function buttons. Now, the focus ring on mine is a little bit stiff from usage over time, and that is completely my fault. But some of the custom function buttons, although it doesn't have an aperture ring, it does have your autofocus and manual focus toggle. It can limit your focus just like the other lens can. And you can turn your optical steady shot, which is your in-lens stabilization, on or off. And then you have 2 modes for that optical steady shot. Tech specs and custom function buttons aside, how do these lenses actually perform? Like, is the autofocus on this lens even comparable to what you get on this lens that's 7 years newer? Is it more convenient or better to use one or the other for the price? And do these custom functions like actually make a difference when you're capturing images? Because that's really what our goal is to capture good images. Well, we're going to go find out right now. I'm going to go film a basketball game, and we're going to see how these both perform and if it's worth the money to buy this much more expensive, but seemingly much more versatile f2.8 lens over this much older and still good, but more limited f4 version. So I've just arrived at the venue. We're about an hour and a half early, and kind of how I want to approach this is I'm going to film with each lens for 1/2, so 2 quarters each. And I'm going to do 1 quarter in the stands or the bleachers, and then another quarter from the floor for each lens. So ideally I can hit the same spots and try to get the same shots with each lens, and then we can compare them side by side. So that's how we're going to do it today. Also, shout out Viva Camera for renting me the f2.8 lens that we use. Like, they didn't give it to me for free or anything, and it's not sponsored, but they were just super nice and like flexible with me on like my return times and when I could pick the lens up, and like just accommodating me so that I can have the lens for as long as I needed to and make like a good, comprehensive, thoughtful video about it. So that was super cool of them. If you're in Toronto and you need gear, they're in the West End, and they were like just really nice to me, which I really appreciated. But yeah, let's pop inside and get set up. It might be a bit loud in here, so I'm gonna keep this quick. But we're gonna start the first half with the 7200 f4 right here, and we'll go to the f2.8 in the second half.
I recorded the first half of warm-ups on the 70-200mm f4 lens before recording the second half on the f2.8 Mark II lens so I could have some initial shots to compare, and then switched back to the cheaper f4 alternative for the first half of action.
Getting away with it because I have an FX3 and can basically cheat by using 12,800 ISO. But if I wasn't able to do that, I'd have to film at 1/125 shutter and 60 frames per second at 6400 ISO. It doesn't work for a lot of people. I've got no complaints like sharpness or anything or focusing. Like, it's focusing like pretty well. I'd say the autofocus is pretty responsive. And like, I think the lens looks sharp. I've shot a lot of basketball games with this lens a long time ago, so I know it's a good lens for that type of thing. But if I wasn't using such a good camera for low light, then the low light performance would actually be really worrying right now.
At this point it was halftime, so it was time to put that more budget 70-200mm f4 lens away and grab the much heavier and more expensive 70-200mm f2.8 Mark II. The most evident thing right when I started shooting with the f2.8 Mark II lens was the bokeh and the depth of field. It made a big difference in the beauty of my close-ups and detail shots, and I'm super happy with how they turned out. After all that, I ran back to my computer to edit a quick highlight, then got up into the bleachers to test the f2.8 lens from a higher angle.
Got nothing but love cause I'm keep with the trust. So keep everything on the hush. Big moves like an elephant. My shit is nuts. I'm about to be rich. Feel it in my guts.
So just in the process of driving back right now, the f2.8 version was significantly better in low light than the f4 version. Those 2/3 of a stop like actually make a huge difference for the usability of the lens in low light conditions. Now I was shooting on an FX3, which means that it really wasn't that big of a deal because I could shoot at my dual native ISO of 12,800 and get a clean image regardless. But if I wanted to shoot with a 180-degree shutter angle and not use an ND filter, with the f4 version of the lens, I needed to shoot at ISO 6400 to properly expose my image. Whereas I was shooting at around, most of the time, ISO 4000 when using the f2.8 version to get a similar exposure and a similar result. The difference between ISO 6400 and ISO 4000, especially on like some cameras that don't have a super high dual native ISO, can be a really big deal. Like say I was shooting on the A7 IV, for example, another full frame camera. Well, the dual native ISO on the A7 IV is at 3200. And with the f2.8, you could plausibly get away with shooting 60 frames per second with ISO 3200 in a similar environment to what we were in today. But with the f4 lens and shooting at ISO 6400, it's a bit darker, you're gonna see more noise in your footage and it just won't look as clean. The f2.8 version of the lens is just so far and beyond above the f4 version that we've been looking at here for shooting like beauty shots, ISO stuff, like not that it can do macro shots, but like macro-esque type of shots where you're capturing those fine details. The combination of a closer focusing distance and a wider aperture just gives you like this creamy, blurry, beautiful background and a tack sharp subject that really just draws your eye to what you want the viewer to see in a really compelling way. The perceived sharpness and perceived beauty due to the lower aperture and the blurry background and the closer minimum focusing distance on the f2.8 lens was greater than that of the f4 lens. And when we're talking about image quality, like, does it matter what is technically there or does it matter what is perceived by the audience? In my opinion, it's what is perceived. So if because of those factors the f2.8 lens looks sharper, then I guess for all intensive purposes it's sharper. That said, I don't think the f4 lens is a bad option. Like, we saw the footage that I filmed, it looked pretty good. It's very usable. In general, do I think you should spend the extra $2,000 and get the f2.8 version? It depends. If you are a full-time professional, like myself, for example, or if you're especially a full-time professional photographer, then that 78-200 f2.8 is going to come in handy and you're probably going to want to get it. If for what I do, professional sports videography, I had to pick between the older, cheaper f4 or the very expensive, newer f2.8, I'd pick the f2.8 because the combination of the closer focusing distance, the autofocus was like kind of negligible. I felt like they were both pretty good, but the additional custom function buttons and the better low light performance makes that lens worth it for me over an extended period of time. If you're a photographer, then the ability to crank your shutter faster to freeze motion when you're filming fast-paced sports and action is going to be even more valuable. So that 7200 2.8 is going to be essentially a must. But if you have a camera that can compensate for it, or low light's not that much of a concern for you, if you're a hobbyist or you're just getting started and you don't have all that money to spend, the good news is you can get that older f4 lens for like $1,000 used on Facebook Marketplace or something like that and produce really solid images with it, and it can grow with you for a very long time. So I guess my answer is that it's situation specific and you kind of have to assess how badly you need the features in that more expensive lens, and if you actually like make enough money doing this to justify the in my opinion, probably too hefty price tag. But either way, I hope you appreciated this comparison and got some value out of me kind of talking about these lenses and bringing them into the field. If you did, then please make sure to subscribe to the channel, because I post videography and video editing tips and tutorial videos similar to this one on a regular basis, and I would love to have you around for that. Also, drop it in the comments, which lens do you think that you would get? Like, are you more leaning towards that budget side, or are you willing to spend a little bit of bread and get the more expensive one? I'm curious to hear what you all think, so let me know down there. And yeah, that's gonna be all I got for today. So till next time, peace.